does indeed have an official backstory. She has one of, if not the most complex and craziest backstories, and now I can tell you all the sordid details. And it is a bit of a scary story. It's pretty creepy, and it's also very tragic. And no, Alice was not always a perfect vegetarian. She has unalived many people, just like all the Cullens except Carlisle. This is Alice's illustration in the guide. She was born in 1901 in Biloxi, Mississippi. Her full name was Mary Alice Brandon. Her father was a pearl trader, which kept him away a lot, and her mother stayed home and took care of Alice and her younger sister Cynthia and the orchard they had on their property. Alice always sort of had the gift of premonition. Of course, when she was human, it was much more muted, and when she was younger, it came more like feelings than actual visions, and her family found it very amusing at first, and they would say, like, Alice is always right when she would accurately predict the weather, which she almost always did. When she got a little older, she stopped voicing her opinions out loud because she would get embarrassed if they turned out to be incorrect, because they were subject to change, especially when it had to do with people and their decisions. And by the time she was 10, her mother had kind of encouraged her to keep quiet about it, even though she very much believed her, because she was still right often enough that people would talk about it and say that it was unusual. And by the time Alice was 18, she had all but learned to ignore it, but there were still certain situations where she felt compelled to speak. But this often ended up backfiring on Alice. Like this one time, she told her friend not to marry this man, and the friend didn't listen, and it turned out that her husband had a history of insanity, so she turned it on Alice and said that she had put a curse on her and her marriage. And likewise, when her cousin said he was going out west to seek his fortune, Alice begged him not to go, but he didn't listen, and he ended up dying in an accident on the way there, and his parents blamed Alice for jinxing him and his trip. And through incidents like this, she gained this reputation as a witch or a changeling. Then one day, Alice had this terrifying vision of a stranger unaliving her mother in the woods, and her mother believed her, so she locked herself and the girls in the house. And when her father returned, he was really frustrated because the household duties were not attended to and they were being silly. And on his wife's assistance, he went to go look out in the woods and saw nothing and demanded that they go back to their usual routine. But Alice was still haunted by visions of this man, and her father dismissed her as being hysterical, but her mother was still very wary and followed Alice's advice as much as she could. But she still had to go out to get supplies and things, but she was very careful, and she even carried a pistol with her. But after about 2 months, she had sort of eased up on it and was less wary about going out. Then one night, Alice had a perfectly clear vision of a man in a Model T running her mother's buggy off the road, and also of him leaving the accident. By the time she realized, she knew it was too late, and her mother's death was declared an accident. And Alice tried to protest this, but she was met with disdain and disbelief, and her father told her to keep quiet. Now, within 6 months, her father remarried, and her stepmother was much younger, only 10 years older than Alice. And of course, Stephanie mentions that she was blonde. She was very cruel and cold to Alice, although she made a pet out of her younger sister. And Alice expressed her concerns to her father because she seemed suspicious, especially with her mother's death. And then she realized she had confided in exactly the wrong person, because after that, she has another vision of the man who unalived her mother, and she sees her father handing him money. So then she puts the pieces together, and she runs away and goes to find her aunt and uncle and begs them to listen to her, but they dismiss her completely because they still think she's crazy and a witch because of what happened to their son. So then she goes back home and she tries to find the town marshal, but her father and her aunt have already gotten to him. So Alice tries to explain everything and plead her case, but she's just dismissed and called crazy, and her father pays the town marshal to have Alice admitted to an asylum. That's how she ends up in the asylum, and she has her head shaved because of a typhoid outbreak, and that's why she has the short spiky hair. She also undergoes electroshock therapy, even though electroshock therapy wasn't really a thing then, but that's what happened according to Stephanie, and it wipes all her memories, so she doesn't remember anything about her family, but it also allows her to regain her cheerful disposition because she doesn't have the memories of her sadness and her grief. Now, unbeknownst to Alice, there's this groundskeeper working at the asylum who's actually a vampire, and he's taking advantage of this pool of humans who would go basically unnoticed if they were unalived, right? But he forms this special attachment to Alice, and he knows about her gift, and they play these little games, and so they kind of become close, and he protects her from the electroshock therapy and other horrors when he can. So Alice has this vision one day of James. This very James, the tracker that was after Bella in Twilight. Alice has a vision of James hunting her, and he's going to stop at nothing until he gets her. Alice was actually James's singer, and so she tells her groundskeeper vampire friend, and he knows that it's the truth, and they eventually come to the conclusion that he's going to have to turn her, so he bites her and leaves her alone, but he knows that that might not even be enough to delay James before she's fully turned, so he puts himself in James's path, and Alice knows this is a fight that he's not going to win. So when Alice wakes up as a vampire, she has no memories of her human life and also no memories of her time in the asylum. The pain of the transformation had wiped her memory the same way the electroshock therapy had, but she finds that her gift is greatly enhanced and stronger and clearer, and she can see the best future for herself. And the first vision she has is of Jasper the Confederate, and she just knows that they're going to be together, but she also knows that he's not ready for her yet, so she waits for him to find her. And then she also eventually has this vision that she's going to end up with the Cullens, and she starts practicing the vegetarian diet, but only with sporadic success. And then in 1948, she walks into a diner in Philadelphia, and there's Jasper the Confederate, and she's really cryptic and weird, but he just knows that he's met his manic pixie dream girl, and then to please her, he starts practicing the vegetarian diet because she tells him all about the Cullens. And then in 1950, they show up to the Cullens' doorstep and are like, hey, we're moving in. And then on Carlisle's instruction, they get married. Alice enjoys being with the Cullens and forms a special bond with her co-evil twin Edward, and together they enjoy terrorizing teenagers and playing Barbies with them. And here we are today. Wild.